This is The Secret Library, a podcast about writing and publishing books. I'm Caroline Donahue, a life coach who works with writers, and I'm here to tell you this is your year. It's time to stop waiting and start writing. This is episode 93. And before I introduce our guest today, who people have been asking about, when is Lord Birthday coming on? So it is today. I will tell you it is today. But before that, I want to get into this week's novel confessions. So I'm growing into and starting to enjoy this part of the show where it's just me and you and nobody else kind of as part of the conversation. So I've started to think about what I want to share each week as I'm working on the book and chewing on it. And the thing I want to talk about this time is this need to develop an awareness and an ability to tell the difference between when you're procrastinating and when you actually need a breather and a minute to digest things. Because I've been dealing with this scenario recently with my book, and I'm probably about 40 to 50,000 words into the draft. So it's a real chunk of time into the story, but it's not a full book. It's not completely finished. And I have a series of scenes laid out in advance that I want to write. And I got to this point where it was getting really hard to continue. We talked a little bit before about this freeze feeling and the feeling that sometimes you can just get stuck and it's hard to keep going. So I was having a little bit of that after a really prolific period for a few weeks where I was getting a lot down on paper because I was realizing that something didn't fit. And it's really hard to know the difference between, am I just procrastinating? Is it getting scary? Is this getting a little bit too real? Is this becoming something that's threatening to my identity as someone who has not yet finished a book? And is that what's stopping me? Or is it that there is something that hasn't quite clicked into place yet? Is there something that needs to change and something that needs to be a little bit different than it has been up to this point in order for the book to work, in order for everything to fall into place? And what I found was that for me over the last month, it was the latter. And it was that something really needed to change about the story. And I figured out what that was. And now I'm feeling a lot more energy and excitement and enthusiasm about going forward. But I've realized that this distinction between those two states of being is really important for every writer to figure out. So in brainstorming with my group of writers in the coffee shop and in working with my clients, what I have come up with is that when the primary feeling is fear, it's probably because there's something coming up that you're afraid of, that you're afraid will have to happen or will have to change about your life or who you are if you finish the book. And that the most important thing to do in those cases is to explore what those fears are. And they may be ridiculous. My fears are definitely ridiculous whenever I think about what the book will come up because, you know, there's so many writers who are so famous, they can't go to the grocery store. And as an introvert, I think I sort of live in fear and horror of being recognized by my appearance. I don't ever want to be recognized by my appearance. So I think that there's a fear whenever the writing starts to go well that my book is going to become so popular that I'll be like J.K. Rowling and people will know me by sight and I'll have to hide somewhere and never be able to go buy cookies at Trader Joe's when I'm having some kind of cookie attack, which is absurd but important to identify. And so I think if that's the energy that you're leading with as you're fearful about moving forward or feeling just resistant to moving forward, if fear is leading, it's important to address the fears. If there is, on the other hand, a sense of dullness or a sense of just kind of lack of motivation or lack of excitement about moving forward with the book, it may be that there's something going on with the structure of the book that isn't working for you and is worth playing with. And it might be worth asking some questions of why is this story not working? What's feeling boring to me? Could I make this more interesting? Or what would be the polar opposite of what I'm planning to write the next scene about? And maybe is that more interesting? These are the kinds of questions I've gotten to start asking. And in playing with those, I got much closer to what was missing and what I need to go forward with. And now it feels really great and it feels exciting to be writing. So I offer that as my novel confessions for this week, and I hope it's helpful. But now let's get on to the interview and the rest of the show. My guest this week is Chad Murphy, aka Lord Birthday. Chad created Lord Birthday in 2015, and Lord Birthday is equal parts satire and sincerity, poking fun at self-help, didacticism, and internet writing, while at the same time trying to give freshness and new meaning to these forms. The writing itself is inspired by Chad's favorite dry comedic voices: Donald Bartolome, George Saunders, E.B. White, Jack Hendry, Monty Python, Flannery O'Connor, Guy Madden, Philip Larkin, Patricia Lockwood, Marky Smith, Greta Gerwig, Joe Frank, Michael Robbins, and David Bentley Hart. The visual style is an amalgam of various influences as well: William Blake, Sei Shonagon, Lewis Carroll, Leona Fink, David Strigley, Amanda Michelle Smith, David Firth, Chris Casey, Jack Smith, in addition to Cy Twombly and the cover of Akiko Yano's Tadaima. I was so excited to talk to Chad as a huge fan of Lord Birthday. Those of you who don't know Lord Birthday should pause this episode, go onto Instagram and search for Lord Birthday. I would give yourself conservatively 2 to 3 hours to just sit there, and you will know very quickly if Lord Birthday is for you. If, like me, you are openly weeping, potentially holding up a hand against the wall and screaming that you need some Kleenex to sop up all the tears that are running down your face, you will know that Lord Birthday is for you. You may just go, I don't quite get it. The reaction seems to be one or the other. But as soon as I heard that Lord Birthday had a book coming out, I was like, yes, we must talk about Lord Birthday. So I was very grateful that Chad was willing to come on and talk about all the influences and all the subtlety and all the amazing things going on beyond the scenes, and behind the scenes and around the outsides that create the magic that is Lord Birthday. So for all of you who keep writing me and saying, when is Lord Birthday coming on? It's now. It's time to listen. And I know you're going to love it. It was even more amazing than I thought it was going to be. Chad's pretty awesome. So enjoy and happy listening. Hey, Chad, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's very funny because we've switched to a recording platform now where I don't see the person when I'm recording. So in my head, again, you still look like a drawing from your picture. So it's kind of fun to just have your voice. But I have to say, the level of like freak out excitement that people have expressed to me about your coming on the show has been very exciting.
Oh,
even
that's
our
nice.
housemate was like, oh, is it Lord Birthday tonight? When I said I was coming in to record.
Oh, that's very nice. Very nice. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's very kind. Very kind.
So I want to know, like, where did Lord Birthday come from? And how did this, because you mentioned before we started that he's a bit of a persona. So I want to hear the whole thing, like as much as you're willing to share about where he came from, what he's about, where he hangs out, what's up with him.
Right. Yeah, this is a question. I think I'm still in the process of kind of making sense of the different pieces of this. There's a lot of different kind of influences and interests that I have that I think have kind of come together in this way and sort of evolved over time. So it's a little bit like it's kind of like a detective story in itself to figure out, where these specific, aspects of the voice and like kind of the visual style and everything came from. So, I originally was doing this anonymously, and it kind of my only interest in the beginning was to get some unbiased feedback in a sense. I have been writing mostly in secret for a little bit over a decade, since graduate school, and I've been trying to write short stories, and they always were these kind of attempts at being writers I like George Saunders or Kurt Vonnegut, or sort of slightly dark but kind of humorous, absurdist kind of stories. Donald Barthelme is another person that these were all big influences for me when I was in college and in graduate school. So I was always doing that, and it never kind of coalesced into anything. It was always there was just never much of a voice or much personality in it. To be honest, it was technically or grammatically correct, and they were they were kind of whimsical and kind of weird and kind of funny, but it never sort of came together how I wanted it to. So, originally this Lord Birthday idea, the name. I mean, I had been sort of just brainstorming, thinking about creating some kind of anonymous persona as a way of practicing writing and also cartooning, which I had never really done before. I mean, that was not something I grew up really doing. I would draw and doodle every now and then, but it was never a pursuit or something I felt like I could do. So, I had this kind of series of sort of serendipitous, encounters with different writers and different artists. One is named David Shrigley, who I saw some of his work in Vancouver. I happened to be there for work, and I went to the Vancouver Art Gallery, and some of his work was there. And it kind of was this epiphany in a sense, where I felt like it's hard to explain, but I could just sort of sense that this was something that I needed to integrate with the writing that I was doing. And I just had this kind of, for the first time, I mean, this is very rare. This has never happened to me, but I had a pretty clear sense that it was going to work. It was one of those moments where it's like,
really,
yeah, it was weird, because I for a long time the short stories did not work, and I'd kind of come to this place where I didn't know what to do creatively. And it was a very strange day, because I saw some of his work in the gift shop at the Vancouver Art Gallery, and I could sort of sense as I was looking at it that there was something in me that could do that. And I also, this sounds strange, but for the first time I felt like I saw some of his work, and I could kind of already tell that I'd have some tools to be able to build on that kind of style and that kind of work. And so it was just this sort of series of realizations. And the name itself, I sort of came to just on the train on the way home from Vancouver to Portland. And
on that same trip?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I'd been in Vancouver, and then I was on the way home, and I was trying to just sort of write these, kind of phrases, and then do a drawing to accompany the phrases. And it was just a word combination that, again, just felt kind of intuitively like that was correct. And so I just kind of went with it. I mean, there wasn't much of a strategy in the beginning. I had these influences and these interests, and just kind of started. And it really, being anonymous was hugely helpful, because I got all this feedback, from people who had no idea who I was. And so I could sort of over time start to figure out what I could do and what was working and what wasn't. So I don't know if I wish I had a more concise answer for you that,
No, I think that's amazing. I guess the questions I have are like, do you die laughing while you're writing these things? Because I have had to like hold myself up in the hallway of our house while attempting to convey one line of it. And I have to say that my husband's name now, we haven't called him this in a while, but like my stepdaughter and I went through like a solid month of calling him a peanut butter bitch baby because of the cartoon. And we had a
Sure.
cat that we called old banana chips. Like
Oh,
there's just so
yeah,
many in
yeah.
there that have gotten integrated. And I'm like, do you just come up with these phrases and just lose it? Or are you like, no, that's pretty good. And then other people lose it?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's you know, for me, I mean, on this side of it, it is, and I had been asked this question by a friend or someone who works for the publisher that's putting out my book, but and I didn't know how to explain this, and I sort of sounded a little too pessimistic about it, but it is a lot of work. A lot of this stuff, there's a lot of revisions that it goes through. I know when people first encounter it, some people dismiss it kind of quickly because it looks sort of kind of childlike, and it looks like not that difficult to do. To be honest, it's kind of like, well, how hard is it to write a list, right? But
No, I believe me, I read a lot of lists in my life and none of them are that good.
well,
So
well,
I
that's
knew there
nice.
was a science to it.
Yeah, it's a lot of revising. There's kind of a long process of these things kind of coming to mind, and I take a lot of notes and then just see if they work. And there's a lot of them that I've never done anything with that I think probably don't work, and they don't make sense in the way I hope that the finished kind of product does. But so for me, there are times I can kind of sense now when it's on the right track. It's more, and I don't know. I'm trying to think if I've ever actually. I don't know if I've ever laughed necessarily at stuff I've
Really?
made. I don't think so. I mean, I think what I will. What it is a feeling. I feel pleased with it. I feel like
Okay.
sad. There's a kind of satisfaction. I think it's a different kind of emotion. It's that I feel, yeah, like I completed what I was trying to do, and I will, yeah. I mean, I will go back to some of them, and I can kind of see it fresh. But part of the problem is I just look at it for so long.
Right.
Some of these I've had for months, and they just don't ever kind of do what I want them to do, and so I kind of sit there until it comes together. But I think I'm a little too close to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
It's hard for me to. I can hear when I think it's going to work, but it's hard for me to hear it like a reader, a reader would hear it. I think so. Yeah. But my wife is the person that hears all of these first, and she she she's a fantastic editor and just sounding board, because there is this collaborative aspect to this where I will send her something, and if she's not reacting in the right way, then I know it's not quite there. So yeah, it's kind of a, I don't know. There's a lot of kind of back and forth
I'm
that I do.
sure.
You know.
That's amazing. Well, so do you get the idea first, or do you get an item on a list and say, well, what would that go with? Or does it happen all different ways?
Yeah, it's another great question. So it's kind of both directions. So I've got these lists of phrases and kind of word combinations and names and things that have no home in a sense. They've just sort of they're kind of homeless at the moment, and then if I'm working on a new idea, then I'll sometimes figure out ways to get them in there. But it's a very sort of I was going to use the word iterative, but it's there's a lot of cycling through material, and a lot of trial and error. And I think the main thing I've got better at is just sensing when it's getting there. I still have lots of failed ideas, and I think there's a lot of pieces that just are too nonsensical, and we can talk about that later too, because there is a sort of there is a fine line between something working and something kind of spilling over into pure nonsense, and pure nonsense doesn't quite get the same effect. And yeah, that's kind of maybe a longer topic, but
Yeah.
so yeah, so that's kind of my experience of it. I do wish, I am always curious, what they sort of feel like to encounter, and I don't know. I try to just kind of follow that instinct when it feels like it's doing something, in terms of the language and the visuals.
It's amazing to me when you said at the beginning that you were writing short stories and that they didn't feel like strong enough or with distinctive enough
Hmm.
character, when this is exactly the opposite. Like it is he's the whole thing is such a strong sense of character.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like character on steroids. Does it feel that way when you write them?
Yeah, well, that's nice of you to say. I that has always been, the goal. I think, yeah, it does feel that way. It does feel like, I sort of found, a format, and now I'm trying to think of ways to build upon the format, or try to expand on it a little bit. But it is a very strange thing where, I think anybody who makes art or is a writer, is often in search of the right format, the right medium. And that can take a long time. Some people, I think, stumble into the right medium at a young age. But for me, it took a long time to figure out, that I'm somehow able to draw these things in this particular way, and that I'm able to sort of think vertically in terms of, writing. It's a very, I think it's just almost a brain wiring kind of thing. It's how things are organized for me, where I can, it's slightly like poetry, but it's not, it's somewhere in between all these different kinds of writing and kinds of drawing. So, um, yeah, it does feel that way though. I mean, I did have that sense when I first started, like before I posted anything, I could kind of tell, like, for some reason I'm kind of designed to make this sort of thing, and it's a weird thing. It's a really weird experience, because I had never had that. I mean, I've done a bunch of different things, and it um, never kind of felt, kind of alive in that way.
So how was it when you first put it up? Did you start with Instagram or did you start somewhere else?
Yeah, I did start on Instagram, and mostly because I didn't have any other outlet. So I did my undergraduate degree in literature. I studied Japanese and English literature, and then I did a master's degree in comparative literature. But I didn't do an MFA, or I didn't, I'm not sort of trained as a writer or as a poet. I don't feel like I have any kind of professional training. It's all been sort of me on my own, and I don't really have a network of friends who are in those circles either. So I didn't really know anybody who was publishing in literary journals or publishing books. I have a couple of professors who are, doing things like that, but I didn't have much access to anything. So Instagram, was kind of the sort of only space I could see where I could kind of try some of this stuff out. And I started there. Yeah, it was the fall of 2015, so September or so of that year. And I mean, you can see I've left them up because I feel like it's somehow useful for me to remember where some of these things started. But they were very different. They were, I'm trying to think, they were kind of observational, and they were more cartoon oriented rather than kind of list or text oriented. And they were kind of strange drawings with these captions beneath them. So sort of like New Yorker cartoons, but not like the same kind of witty sort of humor. just kind of odd, I don't know. I felt like I'd find kind of sentence fragments and things that I thought were interesting, and tried to pair them with the images. And so, yeah, that's where it started. And
So you started in 2015, and then as of recording day today, you have 180,000 followers.
yeah, I know, right?
That is
it is, yeah.
so great.
Well, yeah, it is.
Or is it horrible? I
No,
don't
it's,
know.
oh,
How do you
no,
feel
no.
about it?
I should, yeah, I don't want to imply that I'm not, grateful for that people are interested. I'm, always just thrilled that anybody cares and is enjoying it. Yeah, it has been it's been a surreal thing, because it was not. I mean, I did have a sense that it was going to work with a specific audience. I just, I didn't know how big that audience was. I didn't know sort of who was doing things like this. It kind of has taken some time to figure out who, some of the people are that I feel a kind of kinship with. And yeah, it has evolved quite a bit since then. I mean, I have, put, a lot of kind of thought and energy into figuring out how to kind of evolve this thing. And yeah, I mean, I haven't had many other hobbies. I'll be honest. It's it's sort of,
This one seems pretty great, so I wouldn't blame you
yeah, it's kind
if
of
this one was kind of filling that category.
right, right. Yeah, it sort of has. And yeah, it's been a great sort of creative experience for me. And I'm, in the process of figuring out kind of how to keep evolving. I always, I don't want to repeat myself. So I'm always thinking about that. How do I sort of expand this, or improve it in certain ways? So I'm thinking about that too. But yeah.
Well, how is the process of it becoming a book? Because you now have a book coming out. And I think that's kind of an amazing cycle that's happened, where you started out writing these stories and you're like, this isn't quite working. I mean, when I publish these, I don't know. And then going in a direction, it's like, no, I like this better. And now you end up with a book anyway, which is awesome.
It is weird. It is a strange. I don't know how, if yeah, I don't know if this is common or not, to kind of, I, I found a sort of pathway that I think the first thing to say about it is that it was just not expected. It was not in my frame of reference for, how I would be working creatively, to be doing, to be drawing. First of all, this is not something, I had done much of. So my family, when they found out that this was me, I told them about a year ago exactly. And I had
Oh, you
siblings.
only told them a year ago,
Yeah.
and they were they fans and didn't realize it was
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. So I had siblings that were following me, and yeah, they did not know. They did not
That is
know.
so great.
Yeah. They didn't know. My sister had been following from the beginning. So she had been following for a long time, and, would tag like her friends in the stuff I was making. And I remember it was a confusing experience, because I was kind of like, well, I can't like tell everybody at now, like I just started, I need some more time. And then it kind of kept escalating to the point where I couldn't, it was getting hard. I was like, this is gonna be so weird to tell her at this point. So yeah, a year ago I did send her a text and just sort of said, like a by the way, kind of, oh yeah, by the way,
Hey, I'm Lord
yeah.
Birthday.
And she sort of had a panic, like a mild panic attack for a minute, and was like,
Really?
because they just, this, once that it's me, and people that know me, in my, personal life, it makes sense to them once they see it, and they're like, oh yeah, there's so many aspects of you and kind of your sense of humor that are in this. But if you don't know that it's me, it wouldn't be obvious, So because I have a brother who's a well-known animator. He's a video game animator in
Mm.
LA, and he's the one who draws, the one who's artistic in that way. And so they were not expecting me to be somebody who'd be doing that. And I never did either. I was thinking, I'm a serious, I thought for a while, yeah, maybe I'm a fiction writer, or I can write kind of, serious sort of highbrow fiction. And I did a lot of that. I mean, I did a lot of that just kind of never went anywhere. And so I don't know, there is some truth, I think, to just being open to what your skills actually are. And I think we always have an idea about who we are in this kind of aspirational self as a creative person, right? Like I'm, and what you like, and you often want to emulate that. And it's been this kind of big realization for me, personally, that I have some skills that might not be the skills I thought I had. And that's a strange thing to go through, where I started understanding, like, whatever it is that I'm doing here, this is something that I feel like I'm supposed to be doing, because it's just sort of where my skill set is. And I think I resisted that for a while. I kind of would resist the idea of doing, something that wasn't especially literary, or, I've tried to integrate a lot of those influences into this, but, I was in academia in the humanities for some time, and there's a very sort of literary mindset there. And so, it's kind of this process of learning, I think, where your voice is. And it's a confusing, complicated thing. So I do feel really, really lucky, really grateful that I've sort of uncovered this piece of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's so much of that now, where there are all of these arenas in which you can be creative, and ways that you can share stories.
Mm-hmm.
And there's more and more outlets for it, and there's more and more formats, and there's more and more ways to consume content.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we still seem to put literary fiction kind of on this pedestal.
Mm-hmm.
And, I love reading literary fiction like anybody else. And I've been sort of slogging along with my own novel for over a year, and, in probably a similar identity situation. But there is this sense of like, oh, this is, serious, and other things are not, when I just don't think that's true anymore. And we all have to think about, like, well, who am I open to being? And maybe would I be happier, having more room to consider the options?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. It's I think we all have to kind of, reckon with the fact that, we're in a different age. We have different technologies at our disposal, and people, engage with language and with, with writing and with art in very different ways. And I think, that's something that takes time, I think, to kind of, for everyone to get their head around, that, the stuff that's happening that might seem kind of lowbrow, or might seem sort of not worth spending time on. I mean, I've felt like we are at this kind of, we are in this kind of evolution point where I think the way we read, the way we consume, art is changing so drastically that I think we do have to at least think about how we respond to that. And I will say there's a book by a writer. Her name's Virginia Heffernan. It's called Magic and Loss. So the subtitle is "The Internet as Art," I believe, is what it's called. And it's a book. This really was a huge influence on this kind of shift that took place for me. Let's see, summer of 2016, where I kind of shifted to longer, more text-based stuff. So before that, I was doing mostly kind of one panel sort of drawings. There'd be a little bit of text, or these kind of comic, sort of situations, and then maybe there's a little bit of dialogue. But in that book, I won't be able to replicate her argument, but she essentially, argues, for the internet as a place to create, legitimate art. And it's really wonderfully written, and I thought really nicely argued. And it was very convincing to me. And she pointed out, for example, that, we often bemoan the fact that nobody reads anymore, but she sort of points out that it's actually just the opposite. We're living in this sort of hyper literate situation where it's on our phones, but everyone is reading constantly. We're constantly engaged with language, like maybe too much, but we're always reading all the time, whether it's text messages, emails, news articles, whatever it is. And I sort of, became a little bit more optimistic after reading that book. And I thought, I can probably put some more text in this. I could probably try. I could try.
They could probably handle it.
Yeah. Because there's always this sense on social media that, the advice I think I had, or just sort of, you kind of assume looking at what other artists and other people are doing, is that you need to make it very sort of snappy and easily consumable. Like you don't want to complicate things or else people are just going to scroll past. And so I started to realize, I was like, well, maybe if I could figure out how to write this in a compelling way and allow this voice to come out a little bit more, maybe I think people will read it. I think we're doing that all the time. And so anyway, that book I think was a big factor in me sort of looking at the stuff I do, and I know everyone doesn't view it this way. I have friends and other people who I think I'm probably wasting my time, or why this isn't a serious pursuit. But I think that's fine. I think this is just the nature of our the situation we're in with technology and how we engage with it.
Well, you can always have the argument, 180,000 fans can't be wrong.
I guess, right? I think, well, yeah. I mean, I do feel like, I try to ask, I know I'm asking more of people than some other folks who are doing stuff in the similar kind of vein. I think my stuff, there's just more reading. There's more reading. I try to make it a little bit more. I don't know if I do this deliberately, but it just kind of comes out in ways that are a little bit hard to decipher sometimes. I think that is both good and bad. I think some people really enjoy the fact that it doesn't quite fit in any category. They're like, is this satire or are you serious? I get those questions a lot. And I try to not define that for people. I mean, I think there's a little bit of both, but I know for some people they read it, their reference point is just very different. And so they see it and it's like, it just doesn't connect. It doesn't connect at all. So, and that's fine.
Well, I'm sad for them. I'm sad. I don't think I have never once thought to myself while reading them, well, what category does this fit in? I'm just like trying not to like drip snot all over myself because I'm like weeping with laughter.
Well, that's great. I mean, yeah, that's what I would hope, is that, it has a lot to do with, I think, just people's reading style. I've kind of noticed that, some people, if they read for, we think how to describe it, like, if you read primarily for plot, let's say, or for content, and maybe you're less interested in kind of the nuances of language, or just sort of words in and of themselves, I think, I think sometimes it's just going to it's going to not register right, or they're going to feel like, and I've gotten this comment before, quite a bit from some people where, they just kind of feel like it's just kind of dumb, it's just kind of like, like, this is just like, what's the point? It's just sort of dumb, and it's one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, is I've heard this a lot, where people are like, you're just being weird for the sake of being weird, or you're trying to be funny by just saying really bizarre, absurd things. And that's actually never what I'm trying to do. I'm only trying to make stuff that feels like it's kind of alive in some way, and
yeah.
it has personality and it feels true in some sense, and things that are weird that don't feel true, or they're kind of untethered from reality. To me, they're never really funny. I mean, they never really work. If it's just pure nonsense, pure absurdity, that tends to be, I think, just not very interesting. So it is a lot about word choice. There's a lot in there about rhythm, and sort of thinking about how these words appear visually when they're next to each other. So there is a slightly more poetic, I think, sensibility in the sense of, I think you do need to kind of be interested, or at least kind of attuned to some of those things for it to connect. If you're like, who is this person just, this is terrible advice or whatever it is, they're like, this advice doesn't work. Like, what is the point of reading this? I mean, I hope in the experience of reading it, you do get something that feels helpful. That's kind of the idea, is that these bits of advice, I hope they're helping, but probably not in the way that they first announced themselves to be helping.
Sort of like the way that you ended up writing.
Right.
It's a similar process, like advice that works not for the reason you think, and a writing project that comes alive not in the way that you originally intended.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that, but yeah, exactly. There's a kind of, it kind of sneaks in, somehow, and does it in a different way. Or some people feel like it's pure satire, that I'm sort of making fun of different things, or of kind of lists and internet writing. There's always,
well, that's true. There is a lot of listicle writing out there.
Yeah, and sorry about that. That's true. I think that would not last. I think there's always there's a little bit of that with some topics where I'm kind of poking fun at different things, but I think I realized kind of soon, kind of quickly, that like this can't sustain itself. Like I can't. It's just not me either to be a purely kind of cynical or satirical person. There's always needs to be more sort of, I think, reality and more sentiment in there. So yeah, I kind of get. I think I'm in between a bunch of different things, but I'm glad. I'm glad you feel like that's not as big of a concern, the genre.
Not really. I mean, well, the one thing as you were talking, it made me think of is that, well, I'm just a language obsessed creature. So I think the use of language is really appealing, but there's also something of kind of Dadaism in it for me, which my undergrad was in art history, and I was a Duchamp junkie and did my senior thesis on Duchamp and the large glass, and how he was in some ways deliberately trying to mislead people whenever he talked about his work. They were like, what's this about? And he would say a different thing every single time.
Right.
And I loved him. I still love him. I'm sort of like, born in the wrong time period kind of thing. I would have loved to have known him. But there's a little bit of that in here. It's like, it just genuinely feels fun what's happening on the page.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, there is. Yeah, absolutely. So let me think. I mean, I've been talked to a few people about this, but Dada or surrealism in general. I'm not especially well versed in any one of these artists or writers, but I mean, for sure, that is I think kind of a natural mode for my humor, and I think what I've tried to do is figure out how to integrate some of those tendencies into more sort of I don't want to say sentimental, but more sort of sincere, I think, expressions. So there's always, I try to have something in there. Or I don't know if I try to do this anymore, but I tend to sort of always land in places where, I want people to engage with it, I guess, on different levels. So there's a kind of playfulness to it, but there's also hopefully a kind of sincerity, or something that feels like there's some real something something real in terms of sentiment in there. So it is a little bit, in terms of, for example, the book, trying to market the book. I know we've
Yes. This is very interesting to me. Like how you went from like the wild west of like having total control and you're,
right.
I'm just going to put these up when I feel like it. And then did they approach you or how did you end up with the book? And then how has it been to work on a book and totally transform sort of the output method?
Yeah, this is it's a great set of questions, and it's been quite an experience because they did approach me. So the publisher's Andrews McMeel, and they're known for these big, very famous comics. So Peanuts, Calvin and Hobbes, The Far Side. They have all of these folks, and they've done a lot of these really big sort of web comic folks too. Very very popular people. Like the Oatmeal and Sarah's Scribbles. People who have very very large audiences. So my editor there, she had emailed me. So it was the fall 2016. So I I'd only been doing
So
it.
this is like a year and a half or something.
Yeah, that's right. I started the account only a year earlier. I'd only been doing this for that year, and
Wow.
yeah, and they said, we think this could translate into a small book, and they wanted a certain number of pieces that I hadn't posted anywhere. So I just, of course, was excited that they were interested. And I'm still, it remains to be seen sort of how this plays out, because my stuff is not. I'm not sure what to compare it to, that they've published. This has been, I think, a question, they've had, and I've had. We've all been trying to kind of figure out, exactly, how to frame this for people, because they also publish a lot of poetry. So like Rupi Kaur, people that
Oh
sell
yeah.
lots of books of poetry. These very very famous folks. And I think that I was somewhere in the middle of all of this stuff. They felt like it kind of looks like poetry sometimes. It's not poetry. It kind of has this absurdist thing, like maybe The Far Side. The humor is very dry also in a lot of places. So I think it was a good fit, but I think we're still trying to sort out how to frame this for people, because people who are fans of that publisher or like things that they put out, some of the feedback has been they're a little bit confused about what is this supposed to be, like is it and right, and so that is a new this is new territory, because when you shift from just the creative output to now a more of a marketing mindset, or you have to at least even just think about how to describe this so people can kind of make sense of it. I think we'll see how it goes. We're I'm hopeful that enough people will kind of connect with it, but it is a little tricky. It's a little tricky because it's visually. I was trying to think, of like, okay, where is this sort of template coming from, where you have text and you've got things illustrated around the side of the text and there's some kind of title. The best I could think of was like, William Blake or Lewis Carroll, like these very old 19th century,
Right.
poets who were, kind of making these etchings of poetry, or in the case of William Blake, making these etchings. And this is sort of where it comes from, but that's not a great tagline. I don't think these days.
The modern William
Yeah,
Blake.
like the 21st century William Blake. That's not. I don't expect that to be too compelling to most people today. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
I like the phrase poem comics that you use in the description of it.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Thanks.
Maybe people aren't ready for that, but I think, I think about like new forms as they showed up. I'm sure at some point people were like, what is this? And what is a novel? You know, like you keep looking at movies from a certain period of time and they all just thought all fiction novel, which now we hold as like this sort of pinnacle of artistic achievement in the written word. It was like horrible smut and just
Right.
not to be touched, you know, like don't let the young ladies get their hands on the novels for
Right.
God's sake,
Right.
you know.
They're corrupting the
And
youth.
now everyone's like, please, I'm just got to write a novel to prove my worth as a writer. And you know, I think that everything goes through this evolution, and maybe you're just onto something new here.
Well, I hope so in a sense. I'm glad you like the term. I'm trying that out a little bit to see, some of the new stuff that I'm working on, I think is moving more in that direction where it's maybe slightly less sort of advice oriented, and that was, I think, a useful kind of natural form for me to be writing in. It just sort of felt kind of natural, but yeah, I think some of the stuff I'm doing now, or I'm going to try to do, is going to be a little bit more in that kind of space. But I agree. I mean, what was it the other day looking at? I'm trying to think of where I came across this, but just sort of early encounters or sort of critical opinion of talkies of motion pictures that included
Right.
sound. It was like this very lowbrow sort of like this is never going to go anywhere, or I should say maybe it was silent film, maybe it was film. Yeah, that's what it was. It was just film in general.
It's like,
It was
oh,
like, this
things
is,
moving, looking at pictures. This is
yeah, this
bullshit.
is not, nobody's going to like this. This is a waste of time. This is not an art form. So yeah, I think it's kind of exciting. I think there are new possibilities that we can kind of combine different forms and different media in new ways. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
Well, you'll just have to tell us about what it's like to be on the bleeding edge. I mean, I think of all these art forms, you know, as a art history one, I could probably run on forever, but like even photography, it was just like photographers have had chips on their shoulders for, you know, 100 and some years
Right.
about like, oh, it's not painting. It's not
Right.
painting, so don't get too excited, you know.
Right. Right.
And yet it has so many different capabilities, you know, that are just unique and important on their own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's kind of it's an interesting kind of, I think we're still in this kind of Wild West period where, I have some friends and other people doing kind of similar things, but I think everyone's trying to understand what this kind of writing looks like and how to translate that into books. I think is the next stage where I think we're all trying to understand that, like, what kind of book, what is the experience of reading this like? And I feel like it works, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. But I think it's for sure a kind of new sort of medium in a sense.
Well, I think there's nothing more exciting than being inside of something like that that's new, because you look back on these things later and think, "Oh, of course." But at the time it felt, you know, it feels uncertain and strange, and is this going to work? Is it going
Right.
to collapse? But there's something really alive about it.
Right.
In some ways I think that's the whole point of creating in the first place.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I hope that there's enough kind of energy and kind of life in it that it kind of can sustain itself as a book. And that's been something I thought a lot about as I was putting it together. How do I it's 120 pages, so it's not like just one post that you scroll past, you read for a minute. So we did have to think about variation between pages, thematically, but also in terms of the language. So I got pretty detailed in terms of thinking about the ordering of it. So that took a really long time to order it, because first we just tried to do it randomly, but I realized that there would be sort of repetition between certain pages where it was kind of certain phrases were kind of stepping on other phrases. So yeah, it was quite a process to figure out how to order these things and how to kind of create a reading experience from what began as posts, but they're the same. A lot of the artwork is the same. A lot of the posts are the same, but there is this kind of switch where they're rectangular. First of all, I had to kind of adapt to. Yeah, they're slightly rectangular. They're not square, and so that took sort of reorganizing in terms of where the text is. And I know that graphic designers there were probably so sick of me because they'd send me a draft and I'd have to say, okay, like, can this sentence kind of be spaced over 4 spaces? It's like,
oh no, I'm totally with you. I was a proofreader, so I will start to rekern signs outside of bars, when they have those letters in the thing, and I'll sit there and start. I'm just like, oh, I can't stand the kerning.
Yeah, absolutely. And with my stuff, it's also because there's the drawing and the image where there's a bit of an interaction between the two, and if they're not, I've sort of learned if they're positioned incorrectly, it just kind of like the balance is off and it looks very strange. So it was a kind of intense, and it was a fun process, though, I should say. My editor there, Melissa, has been fantastic and seemed, right from the beginning, really understood what I was trying to do. And I felt really lucky that everyone there, was very supportive, because it isn't, I don't think, a very, typical sort of book for them to put out. I think it makes sense on a number of levels why they were interested, but I think, I don't think my stuff's for everybody. I mean, I think that's clear. I think for some people, it's the sense of humor is not theirs. So, I think we'll see, kind of how that goes. But yeah, I'm hopeful, and I've been happy with how it turned out. So, so we'll see how it goes.
Well, congratulations on the book, and I hope everybody runs out and grabs it, and that they are now just eager to have it as I am. And I'm so grateful that you were able to come on and talk to us more. I'm even more enthusiastic about your work now that we've gotten to have this conversation.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's so nice. Yeah, I hope people enjoy it, and I hope it's it kind of does what people are expecting it to. I feel like it does. I feel like we accomplished what we were trying to do with it. So we'll see what everyone thinks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Secret Library podcast. The show is produced by me, Caroline Donahue, and Frederick Barry McWilliams Jr., my tireless audio engineer. To get show notes for this episode and all other episodes, please visit secretlibrarypodcast.com. To get updates, literary love, and notification when new episodes are posted, sign up there for Footnotes, my newsletter. And to learn about life coaching with me to work on building your writing life, visit carolinedonahue.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. Gold stars to everybody who leaves a rating and review on iTunes. We're so grateful. Until next time, happy reading.